So this is a daytime shot, but it is overcast. Unfortunately, a lot of the best waves are happening when the weather's a little bit more fall. So just going to do, this is mostly a perspective sketch, or trying to get the waves in the right position. So we've got a group of waves. We've got this landmass here that comes down. A fairly large gap. And we have one of the more interesting waves. I brought that land much too low. Those are the brushes that we are going to be using. Okay, the palette we were using yesterday is pretty much a good palette for today. So we're going to start with the sky. I'm just going to turn that over just so I don't have to reach as much. So we're going to mix a gray using the ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and white. And that white's not particularly clean, but for the grays that we're after, it's going to be just fine. So we're definitely going to want that a lot whiter. This, I've mixed a gray. I can mix it completely neutral by adding more burnt sienna. But in this particular case, having a slight blue tone, I think, will be a little bit more interesting. I'm not going right down to that horizon line because there's land masses there. But I think this is too dark. So we're just going over. This is definitely turning out darker than what we have on the palette just because it's mixing with the wet paint, but I think we might just come in that with, have a nice lot of juicy paint on here. So in the background here we have some very hazy hills, so I'm just going to mix up a color over here because I want it not to be quite that blue-gray, but just a little bit more on the burnt sienna or brown side. And what this is just very slightly, but we're just going to test that down there. And so when we're looking at that, this is slightly lighter than the background. So we need that. What we really want to target is having it almost exactly the same value. So we're going to make that a little bit darker. And why we want to get it exactly the same value is because it will dry darker, and that will probably be pretty close to, this is a little bit darker, but I think that'll be okay. So we're going to top coat this with a glaze after to give it a more overcast, misted look. We don't want anything too pronounced. So we're just going to have a few And we're going to make sure we come below that line so that when we paint the water, we're not going to have to deal with little bits of white that we missed. So I'm just going to bring this up a bit higher. So now we're going to take that, well, I don't like this. So now we're going to come in and go a little bit darker by adding a little bit of both. Now, one of the things you can do, if you're smart, is you can save some of the previous color just in case you want to make a correction, but we're not too... So you can't really see a tremendous amount of value difference there. And because we're going to be glazing this, it's a little bit of shot in the dark, is when we glaze it, we're going to lose a lot of that value difference as we glaze over it. So it's, but I think we may have enough. We're only going to glaze the one side of it. GoPro, stop recording. So we're going to put the glaze on now. We've let that dry. And so we're using this color, the sky color, but we've added a bit more white to it. So we're just going to come vertically up over that. Cleaning the brush. And I'm squeezing it out with my fingers just to take most of the water off. And then I'm just going to work that. And then I'm going to get a dry brush, same kind. If we can reach this darn thing. And so there's no paint on this and it's completely dry. And we're just going to go over that to smooth out that glaze, so you can just sort of make out. And you don't pick the brush up and move to another area. If you need to work on an area, you work it over. So I'm pushing a little harder there to make sure that's blended. And so I have done this. I'm going well down into the water. You do not fret about this. And this is the timing sometimes when you're doing something. You need to pay attention to when to do it and when. The order in which you do this, you give some thought to that because that's when you're going to want to GoPro, stop recording. So I've redrawn in my, it's not actually the horizon line, it would be it's very close to the horizon line, but this is the far shore or the water line. So we're going to use our burnt sienna and phthalo blue to get the greens that we want. And so right at the far shore, it is a little bit darker than what it is elsewhere. So I think this will be an acceptable color. And you can use masking tape, and you can use a KX9 100 to draw this or paint this straight line, but I'm not too concerned about this being a perfect line because this is quite a choppy water day, and so it is natural to see a few bumps, and paint's pretty thin there. Now we're going to add white to that. And I think we're going to add a little bit more burnt sienna just to make a more desaturated green. I think that looks pretty good. So while that's still wet, we'll blend that in. We're not concerned about it being a super smooth blend because we're going to be putting all sorts of choppy water on top of that. I think we'll add a little bit more white to that as we come down. I'm going to put that dark edge of that wave there, and we'll take that a little bit under there. We're in the trough here, and we're just going to blend that sort of into the dark of that. We're not too concerned about getting this exactly right. Mostly we're blocking in colors here. We're going to have to add some more white before we're done this painting. And it actually, when you look at the color, it gets a lot more desaturated and actually a little bit darker down here as the water is starting to get transparent and we're seeing the rocky shore influencing the color of the water. We're going to go a little bit more, and I'm going to introduce some ultramarine into that. And maybe still a bit of phthalo in there. That was too much phthalo. Phthalo is such a strong color. So we've gone a little bit darker. And then that one spot there, we're going I'm using the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna to create that little bit of shoreline that we're including in this picture. Now, what I choose to leave in here is based a lot on that we're talking about waves as opposed to the rest of the painting. So you might choose in painting something like this picture to include much more of the shoreline or even have more of the sky. I'm just throwing in some other colors there into the shore just to give it a little bit more interesting. There's going to be a lot of the white water on top of this area I'm painting right now. This is the dying wave, or the tail end of the wave, or it starts rolling back into the water. GoPro, stop recording. So I'm just cleaning the palette a bit to put down some fresh white. And so this is a great way. You can keep using this piece of paper for ages. You just have to scrape off the paint. The one thing you don't want the Stay Wet palette is to go dry on you, because then you can't scrape the paint off and then it's no longer a Stay Wet palette. It's just, might as well use a piece of glass. So, you can tell that your Stay Wet palette is good is if you feel it and it feels damp. It is possible to get too much water on there and then it turns your paint to liquid over time, which makes a big runny mess. You can see that this burnt sienna is a little bit more liquid than it was, but that's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a whole glaze over the top. I'm not really happy with the way that turned out. So I can do one of two things. I can lay down a piece of masking tape there to stop the paint going into that area. But I think in this case, I'm just going to do a large one and repaint the top part of that. As the masking tape, especially with a glaze, is very likely to get underneath the glaze is very likely to get underneath the masking tape. And I'd need to repaint it anyway. GoPro, stop recording. Very happy. GoPro, start recording. This is the dead wave or the spent wave. Still lots of white water, but there's no depth. It's pretty much expelled its energy against the shore. Trying to keep these lines fairly horizontal rather than following the angle of the shore. It's sometimes a little bit easy to do, but it's one way to help ensure that the water stays nice and flat looking. So I'm just going to go a little bit darker. Get some tad lighter again. And we're a long way from, like, here's the white of the canvas showing through, and you can see that we're still, so hold off on going into that white too early. You want to make sure you give this white water some depth, and so I think we're just going to come into here and just do a little bit of the painting. The trough, and like the previous one, isn't going to have the same value punch, mostly because the sky is very overcast here. GoPro, stop recording. So in the first video, we talked about the shadow cast. And so what I'm putting in here, this is a bit of a combination of a shadow and the depth, or the darker water showing through the face of the wave. Down here, this is clearly the shadow and not the face of the wave. And so we're putting it in possibly a little bit bigger than what you see there, but that's will be coming over top of that with the leading edge of the wave. And it's these little things that you sometimes miss that go a long way to making it look natural. And it's a part of getting better looking. GoPro, stop recording. GoPro, stop recording. We're doing the sky reflecting in the trough here, and keep your strokes horizontal, and make sure you're paying attention to the grouping. You don't want a whole series of individual lines. You want these to run into each other, just like they do in the actual reference that you're looking at. I'm using a 1/4 inch flat on edge here. One of the things you can notice on the palette is that I have a range of these greens mixed there, and so it's a good way to work because you can just pull into the different colors as you need a lighter or darker value. Now right back here there is quite a large whitecap practically on the horizon there, but I think I'm going to leave that out because it looks a bit strange. And if it looks a bit strange in real life, it's going to look really strange in your painting. So we're going to come in a little bit lighter. Too much paint. Just want to return some of this dark on this part of the wave. I mentioned earlier this is not a wave in full break. This is just starting to break, and so you get this little dark part at the top where you're still looking into the volume of the water and it isn't full of air bubbles yet. So we're just going to pull This is just a wet brush where I'm pulling out some of the wet paint down into that wave, and so we'll separate the breaking portion. Try to keep it as random as possible. And one of the best ways to keep it random is to keep looking. It never matters if you're copying what you're seeing, but you're copying the randomness of the wave. So you're looking at, oh yeah, that doesn't do that line. Oh, you don't want to do this. You want to keep that water as random as possible. Some of this foam that you see in the water is actually not from this wave, or a lot of it could be from the wave before, and it's just been lingering on the surface, and this wave just picks it up and lets it float over top. Oh, wait. I'm going to put the shadow just under this one, and when I come to paint over top of this, there are places where the shadow, you tend not to see the shadow on the far side. Not that there's a whole lot of, so this side you'd see the shadow, and this upper side you may not necessarily see the shadow. And this is a rocky shore, so we're just throwing some pebbles in there. We'll come back in with some other colors after. Just put a little bit of dark in there as we're seeing more of the. So we'll get back to. Now this water has a bit of an angle as it's coming in, so it's a balance between the angle that it's flowing in at. Mostly you're going to see it in the front of the wave, and then it starts getting much flatter and straighter in the back. Nothing's going to improve your painting by being better looking. Like, really look at that image and try not to, what you can't see in this shot is how much my head is swiveling to look at that wave. It's very easy to get caught up into letting your brain tell you what it's seeing. A little bit darker as we're going some of this farther back. hear the deep sighs of our dog in the background there. Obviously, he doesn't find this all that fascinating. Touch his leash and he goes crazy. So although this looks like it's white, it still is not white. We've got a little tiny, or a little bit of the green mixed in with it. You want to try and save those whites for when you really want to put the punch in a place and where you want to put it. Just sort of letting that brush skip along. Get a little whiter there. GoPro, stop recording. So we're going to start with getting the landmass in there. It's not a particularly interesting group of trees there, not a lot of negative space, so we may add to that, but this is not really what this painting's about. But we need to get the shore in so that we can start splashing the waves or have the breakers come up on that. We'll come back later and add a little bit more detail. This paint has gotten a lot thinner overnight as the water is percolated into the paint. It's possibly a little on the too thin side, as it's not covering well. Looks like someone splashed a little dark color into the sky. This is one of the advantages of having a Stay Wet palette, as I don't have to take too much time to try and match that color. So we're just going to let that dry while we move on to the white later lights in some of these other waves. Don't want to get too close to it there. I notice we've got a bit of the wrong direction with this wave here. This seems to be sliding this way, not the way that I painted it there. Guess I wasn't being very good looking there. Just want to do some lighter trough color through here. It's not light enough. And you see, that's probably exactly where we want it, but it's going to dry darker. Something you always have to keep in mind. try and show the curve up the face here a little bit. GoPro, stop recording. So I think this is dry enough back here now to come in. Realize I'm using a little tiny round. Not sure where my small rigger went. There's that strange steep line just near the shore right around here, but I don't think I want to put it in that steep. It looks a bit strange. Excuse me. Coming down over the shadow area. Actually, I think we'll do a little bit more work in the front of this. I'm going to try and do this fairly free, as the more precise you get, the more contrived it's going to look. This is really quite a chaotic pattern. It's got pattern, but it's in its micro lines, it's very chaotic. GoPro stopped recording. So we're just going to give a little bit more shape to those trees in there. So we've got enough dark in there, so we're just making a fairly desaturated green. The same green, but we're using more burnt sienna, so we're desaturating that quite a bit. And then we're just getting the light value in there. We'll just check this out. Looks like I've got to touch that spot up again. And take that a little darker. I'll use that. When you're just doing impressions of the rocks, just keep this, the shapes can be need to be very varied, but try to maintain a fairly strong horizontal aspect to them. And switch up the colors quite a bit. Even though these are all basically desaturated orange rocks. Those of you that brown is usually a desaturated orange. That's the base color. It's almost to the point of being gray. Now we can tweak with this painting endlessly, just adding a little bit more light there, and I will do a little bit more of that. But I probably won't do that on camera. Just do GoPro, stop recording. One thing about water is that you can continually work at it. It can always be tough to know when you're done, and really you're never done. It's just you have to decide, okay, that looks pretty good. Anything that I do now, yeah, maybe it'll look a little bit better, but will anyone notice? The three things that allow me to decide whether I'm done a painting is, one, I've worked on it for a bit and I can't really see the difference. Like, yes, if I compared them side by side. The other is that I've run out of time for one reason or another. And the other is I'm just tired of the painting. So you're never done, but today this is done. GoPro, and stop recording. GoPro, stop recording.